Blockchain's gonna change the economy in ways that have some parallels with the way the internet changed the economy. So this video compares those two technological revolutions. In particular, both of these revolutions involve disruptions to the economy's biggest middlemen. And because of that, this video will also explain the blockchain jargon term disintermediation. If you spend much time in the blockchain space, which is basically just social circles of people who talk a lot about blockchain and think a lot about blockchain, you've probably heard the term disintermediation. And this basically just means that people think blockchain will disrupt the intermediaries or the middlemen in a way that makes way for more transactions to happen peer-to-peer. Here's the basic argument that I'm going to flesh out in this video. One of the most important intermediaries or middlemen of the 1990s was retailers. Retailers held and managed the inventories that they bought from producers and sold to consumers. And they also served this role of curator, where they were the ones to select which kinds of products would be offered to the local consumers. Then the internet came along and reduced transaction costs and information costs. And that led to the elimination of many, though obviously not all, of the retailer middlemen. And middlemen of today specialize in making contracts, negotiating contracts, curating information, organizing algorithms, and managing data. And the word curation is a semi-jargony word that's often used in the blockchain community, but it means basically the same thing it means when we talk about a museum curator deciding which pieces of art should go up in the museum and which pieces of art people should see. Think about Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google, Netflix, and Uber. Those companies curate the information we experience first and the information that's most prominent to us when we visit their websites. Now, I'm going to claim that both the curation and the contract roles of these intermediaries will be disrupted by blockchain. Blockchain will reduce the cost of contract enforcement and contract design. Blockchain will also improve curation by creating more secure ways for people to give away their data. And good curation basically just means that you've done a good job of mining people's data to show them what they want to see first. And that's true whether we're talking about Amazon recommending products we want to buy, or Netflix recommending movies we might want to see, or Twitter recommending posts that are going to most get under our skin. Now, the internet reshaping the economy began to take place in the 1990s and then really took off and took over in the 2000s. My prediction is that the 2020s and the 2030s will be the time when blockchain makes a similar shift in the economy. Even though the internet existed back in the 80s, it wasn't yet a household name, and people had not developed some of the features of the internet that made it more easily usable to a broader slice of the population. Features like well-designed search capabilities, wikis, and graphic design web pages each sped up the spread of the internet into new economic realms. You may notice that a lot of these features have to do with usability and ease of access and the human desire for convenience. Similarly, blockchain is probably not going to take off until the user interaction features get hashed out, and that hasn't happened yet. So let's rewind to the 1990s and look at disintermediation, or the elimination of the middlemen, that started to happen back then. You remember how popular shopping malls were in the 1980s and 1990s? These retailers were middlemen between the producer and the consumer, and their job was to keep and maintain inventory so people had local access. If you look at what percent of every dollar you spend in malls goes to the retailers in the mall, these middlemen, sometimes it's actually a pretty high percentage, and that tells us that we're paying a high price for that middleman service. And the staff to manage it and sell it is a pretty expensive thing, and at that time, we were willing to pay for it. A second thing that these retailer intermediaries did for us was that they were the ones to select the products that would be available to us. They had to make projections about what kinds of things they thought people would like to buy, what kinds of things would sell well, and those decisions they made in turn caused things to sell well. So it was a little bit of a weird relationship there. Suddenly, when the internet came along, it became possible for people's actual choices to drive the inventory. And Netflix disrupted Blockbuster in a similar way to the way Amazon disrupted the shopping malls. Now that maintaining an inventory on the store floor was no longer necessary, many of these retailers went to the wayside. And when that happened, we no longer had to pay the high price of their services, even though we had to pay a little bit extra for shipping. It was still a net benefit to people. But even though the internet got rid of one type of middleman, which was the retailer, it paved the way for a new type of middleman, which is the tech monopolies. And while the retailer's main job was to maintain this inventory, the tech monopolies' main job as intermediaries is to negotiate contracts. Both of these jobs, of course, involve building relationships with producers. Many of these organizations are platforms, and a platform is a business whose job it is to create space where external producers and consumers come together to trade. To make a more real-world analogy, it's a little bit like a farmer's market or a town square where people can come together to trade. And when you think of a farmer's market, it's a little bit like a public space where people come to trade vegetables and corn and things like that. But sometimes farmers markets get hosted on private property, like inside malls and things like that. And the people who run the farmers market, they're the ones to set the rules. And they also sometimes set up the space with a strategic design to make it comfortable for both the farmers and the shoppers. That's exactly what a platform is. Online platforms work the same way. Amazon, for example, is basically just a farmer's market that sells anything and everything. It matches buyers with sellers. Facebook is a place for advertisers who want people's attention to be matched with people who have attention, and Facebook designs its rules and its system in order to maximize the experience of both of those groups coming together. Uber is a space that matches drivers with riders, and it helps them negotiate contracts. Dating sites create a place for men and women, or men and men, or women and women, to come together to clear the dating market. So what is involved in creating and maintaining those types of spaces? Well, there's the creation and the enforcement of the rules that govern those spaces. And there's also the negotiation of contracts between the different players. And that includes making the process of entering into those contracts more frictionless. For example, if you've ever used Uber, it's not actually that onerous to download the app and get this thing going, but doing that is essentially entering into a contract that they've already set up between you and the driver. Also think of Amazon. Amazon negotiates with the sellers to make sure the return policies they have are fair and to make sure there's transparent information about their products. Amazon also sets up the contract of Amazon Prime that consumers can choose to enter into in order to get free shipping and access to certain deals. The Amazon Prime contract is cleverly constructed to take advantage of certain human biases like the sunk cost fallacy and effort aversion. The sellers on the other side of Amazon's contracts, I'm talking about the producers of things like shoes, these people benefit from the contract of Amazon Prime. At least some of them do. And the customers like us certainly benefit from some of the contracts between Amazon and sellers. So all of that contract building ends up with at least some satisfaction on the part of all three groups: Amazon, the buyers, and the sellers. This entire set of contracts, it creates this mutually satisfying space where buyers and sellers can come and easily interact. And that's what a platform is. But I want to point out that the magic happens in the contracts because that's important for blockchain. Oh, and Amazon also creates contracts with shipping companies. So there's all kinds of important contracts involved. Also, the organization of Amazon's product rating space and the rules that govern that space, such as when can you get a product review removed and things like that, those could also be viewed as contracts. And you have a similar situation when you look at other platforms. Google creates contracts with advertisers. Uber spends a lot of time figuring out exactly what the pricing algorithms should be. And those algorithms are essentially contracts. Facebook constructs contracts related to privacy and data management. All of these sites employ algorithms that help them structure the rules that govern the space. And there's a lot of different types of contracts in these spaces. Oftentimes, part of good platform management is making sure that the numbers on both sides of the market kind of match up. Dating sites don't work out very well when it ends up being 90% men seeking women and 2% women seeking men. Uber drivers might get a little pissed off if they drive for hours without getting customers. On the other side of that, Uber customers are going to be frustrated if they have to wait. So Uber has to design its contracts to match these two sides. So what is actually involved in developing these contracts? Well, these platform firms have to hire lawyers so that they can work out the legal parts of the contract and adjust the wording because lawyers are trained at that kind of thing. The platforms have to hire strategists and economists to work out the strategic, best profit-maximizing types of contracts. And they have to hire statisticians to estimate the elasticities that go into these contracts that the economists design, and to estimate the behavioral responses that are also built into these strategic contracts. They also hire computer scientists to write up the algorithms that also estimate parameters that go into these strategic contracts. That's a lot of expertise. So it's no wonder that we pay really good money to our intermediary middlemen to do those things for us. However, blockchain is great for keeping contracts, and especially smart contracts that execute automatically. People compare the Ethereum blockchain to a public global computer. This means that any contract posted there can be copied and pasted and tweaked to put into a new context. With blockchain, the designers of contracts no longer have to reinvent the wheel when they sit down to write a new contract. Or at least not if they can look at the Ethereum blockchain and find a semi-relevant contract and pull it from there, tweak it, and put their new contract onto that blockchain. That alone is going to majorly reduce the cost of developing these contracts. So, in a blockchain world, these lawyers and economists and computer scientists and statisticians and strategists, these people don't have to start from scratch anymore. They can look on the blockchain and borrow from it and build on what's already out there. Also, business contracts are increasingly getting tested in these mini controlled experiments. Sometimes this is called A/B testing, and other times it has other words for it. But this is really useful information. If the lessons learned from these contract experiments get recorded permanently on a blockchain for the whole world to see, then over time the ecosystem of contracts is going to get better and better in the same way that the scientific process builds on the body of scientific knowledge. I should also mention that rules that govern any space are just simple contracts. So rule equals contract. So when I say the ecosystem of contracts, that includes the product rating system on Amazon and any system that rates apps or movies or books. And this, of course, gets at the idea of curation. Part of the job of any platform is to make sure that the information presented on a platform is presented in the most convenient order for both sides of the platform market. The curation of information on a platform is a little like the curation of art in an art gallery. Both cases involve selecting the best possible things to be displayed most prominently. Of course, curating art in an art museum means using your own expertise to make these decisions. Curating a platform usually means mining people's data to present to them what they want to see most. Well, it turns out that blockchains may interact well with more secure ways of managing our data, and certainly blockchains will more transparently govern the rules that manage our data. So people may actually have a greater trust lending out their data to platforms on blockchain. Even if their data itself is not on a blockchain, people may feel more comfortable if the rules governing the use of their data is transparently on that public blockchain. A blockchain can create a space for managing the contracts that govern our data in a way that's more transparent and more auditable. And an interested public can make sure that the contracts that govern that platform are fair to both sides. In any case, I hope this video has given you a sense for the way that blockchain can disrupt the economy through disintermediation, or the getting rid of middlemen, and in this case, The particular middlemen we're talking about are these tech monopolies that often take the form of a platform. I've basically argued that blockchain will disrupt the contract negotiating middlemen that have a little bit too much power in today's economy because they own the spaces that are most important for economic activity. This somewhat parallels the way that the internet disrupted the retailer middlemen of the 1980s and the 1990s.